Sweet. All right. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items, and then we'll move into some introductions and then get to the content of this presentation. So, um, as I said, thank you so much for joining us. This webinar is Researching the Koch Network, Background Resources and Skills for Building the Movement. Essentially, the goal of this presentation or workshop is to really make sure folks in our network, our UnKoch network, is familiar with all of the resources largely compiled by the Center for Media and Democracy that exists for you to use. The Center for Media and Democracy has done an incredible job at tracking the Koch network and the activities of the ultra wealthy here in the United States. And a lot of the work that they do can be applied and used to amplify and escalate local campaigns, whether you're on a campus or in the community. And so we're really excited to have David with us, and I'll let David introduce himself in just a moment. Some housekeeping items. We are going to go through this presentation in full and take questions at the end. This is because we are recording this webinar for use by those who couldn't join us and for you all to reference later if you want. Everyone is muted right now. You do have the ability to unmute yourself, but I just ask that you don't unless there's an emergency. And again, this is just because we want to maintain cohesion and get through the presentation, and then we'll unmute everyone and have space for discussion and Q&A at the end. If you do think of a question or you have a comment that you want to share during the presentation, if you're using your computer, and I think even if you're on your phone, you can use the chat feature and you can post the question in there or post your comment in there, and that way we can make sure to review those questions. I'll actually, when we get to the Q&A section, go through the questions that are put in the chat box first and then open the floor for people to verbally ask questions as well. And then at the very end of this presentation, I will put a feedback survey in the chat feature. And I ask that anyone who is willing and able to please fill that out. Feedback matters a lot to us. And if you haven't noticed, we've been doing a lot of these webinars as of late, and we're excited to continue them. We're getting a lot of really encouraging and positive feedback. And so the more feedback we get, the better we can make future trainings. So in terms of some introductions, my name is Samantha Parsons, and I am the campaigns director at UnKoch, my campus. I've worked for UnKoch since 2016, and I came to this work after attending and graduating from George Mason University, which is Koch's top funded school in the country. A little bit of background on UnKoch, my campus. It is our vision to protect institutions that are intended for the public good from actors whose clear intent is to co-opt institutions intended for the public good for private gain. This includes higher education, but this also includes other public institutions like our nation's courts and public K through 12 education, and our legislatures at large. In terms of this vision, for UnKoch, this means that we seek to equip activists on and off campus, so students, faculty, community leaders, state-based advocacy staff, with resources, skills, and peer-to-peer support systems to take on the Koch network. Oftentimes, people think we only work on college campuses due to our name, and certainly that is our bread and butter and has been historically our focus. But more and more people in the community have been asking for our help as of late, particularly in the past 12 to 18 months. And so we have been slowly expanding our audience and our issue areas to meet the needs of our grassroots base. And it makes a lot of sense for us to do this, right? If you're familiar with UnKoch, or if you're not, you can go back and watch some of our webinars on higher education, because it is literally impossible to disconnect the influence Koch is buying on campuses across the country from the consequences that influence on campus is having in our communities day to day. And so we are very excited about expanding and deepening our work on campuses, but also working in the community on other issues as well. We do seek to be anti-oppressive in our approach to achieving our vision, meaning we critically examine power imbalances in our organizing, and we include an analysis of the harms that are caused by capitalism and white supremacy in our messaging and campaign work. And we seek to organize from a place that follows the leadership of the most marginalized and affected communities. I think if you're on this call, you probably know that the Koch network is causing widespread harm in communities across the country. And so it is our intention to build relationship and follow the leadership of those communities who are being directly affected. Last but not least, in terms of our organizing philosophy, we use a distributed model of organizing at UnKoch. This means we partner with other organizations, whether that's student groups, local community groups, state-based or national organizations, to deepen resistance to the Koch network rather than attempting to create new organizations or groups. Of course, if you're calling in from a campus or the community and you want to start your own project or organization under the UnKoch brand, we're happy to help you do that. But I want to make it clear that a lot of our work does include, I would say most of our work actually, includes partnering with already established organizations, whether it is the local environmental organization in your community or the racial justice group on your college campus. We partner with those already established groups to help them build out campaigns against the Koch network. David, I'll toss it to you to introduce yourself and CMD if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Can you move the slide forward?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Do you know which slide I'm talking about? Yeah, here we go. All right. Well, thanks for inviting me, Sam. I'm really happy to be on this webinar with y'all. My name is David Armiak. I'm Research Director with the Center for Media and Democracy. We're based out of Madison, Wisconsin. I've been with CMD since 2015. Started as an intern and moved my way up to Research Director. As you can see here on the slide, we have a number of investigations that we've been working on for quite a few years now. Our most, I should say, the investigation that we're, sort of most famous for is our Alec Exposed, or that on the American Legislative Exchange Council, which I will get into later. But also the Koch brothers, or now with David recently passing, Charles Koch's network. But another number of other areas, the State Policy Network, which I will talk a little bit about later. We've been, of course, very interested in examining and doing research on Donald Trump and his administration. We do a lot of work on climate deniers and the money behind climate denial. And overall, we're all at CMD interested in, preserving the integrity of our democracy and exposing government and corporate corruption. We're nonpartisan. We're registered 501c3 organization, supported not by corporations, but by individuals and foundations. So, I do urge you, if you're interested, following this talk, to go to our site here, exposedbycmd.org, and sign up for our newsletter.
Awesome. And just here is a slide where if you want to find UnKoch or CMD on social media. And then in terms of this presentation, we just wrapped up our introductions. David is going to walk us through some background on the Koch network and Charles Koch's infrastructure of political influence. David's going to review the resources that exist that CMD has spent so long and so much tedious time compiling, as well as go over some skills that David uses in his day-to-day career as a research director that many of us could hopefully put to use in our local communities. And then I'm going to wrap it up talking a little bit about how we can use these resources and use these skills that David discusses for our organizing. I will say that the reason I am so excited about this webinar is that I, as an individual, I've been very influenced and inspired by the work of the Center for Media and Democracy and the research that David puts out and David's peers put out. And so much of what CMD exposes can really invigorate local organizing. But if we don't know that the resources exist and we don't know how to leverage those resources to escalate our campaigns, we're not really working together effectively. And so I'm not only thrilled about the relationship that UnKoch and CMD have at the national level, but I'm really excited to talk about the ways in which you all, our local campus and community partners, can use these resources and tactics in your own work. This is going to be a very it's going to be an overview webinar, but I've already talked to David a little bit about the fact that we will likely be asking him to come back and do some more in-depth skills trainings around research. And like I said, I'll be plugging a feedback survey into the chat soon, and so we might do that. If you do want to learn more or go deeper into things that David overviews today, please be sure to mention that. And then David, if you want, I can stop sharing if you want to take over, since I'm sure you'll have to go back and forth on your screen.
Well, at first, yeah, I mean, if you could, yeah, I won't need to go onto the screen just yet, but
Okay, do you want me to keep it up then?
I'm going to go ahead and preface, this talk by saying, there's no way possible to cover, the complete infrastructure the Kochs have built in one webinar, let alone, a series of 5 or 10. I mean, this is an infrastructure that they have spent decades building. It stretches into so many aspects of our civil society, our economy, the academy, our public schools, our the private school sector. I mean, so many aspects of government, from the national all the way down to the municipal. So if you have any more specific questions following this presentation, feel free to ask them in the chat, or you can also email me. My email is david@prwatch.org. So I will start, with the major donors, right? So all of this is not possible without money, right? This is an infrastructure that has hundreds of millions of dollars pumped into it very regularly, and I will kind of highlight some of the organizations that are funded through with this type of money. But the major foundation or donors are first and foremost the Charles Koch Foundation, which all of you are familiar with Charles Koch. That's why you're here. And it's through this foundation that Charles funds many of the universities and other aspects of his infrastructure. We do analysis at CMD every year when he releases his foundation's tax filings, and through those tax filings, they are required to outline all of their grantees and how much money they give to each of those. So as soon as those filings are obtained, we analyze them and put together a piece or two sometimes of what they are funding in a particular year. Secondly, the major funders that are worth noting are Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund. Now, these are Donors Capital Fund is a sister organization of Donors Trust. They are registered 501c3s, so they're nonprofits. Charles Koch Foundation is a registered private foundation, which is also a nonprofit. But they are actually, Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund, what are called donor advised funds, or donor conduits, meaning money is sent to this organization, right? And allies of the Koch political network. And I should stress that these two are not run by Charles Koch. They are not Koch organizations, okay? They're independent, they're Koch linked, they are, entrenched in the Koch political network, but they are not Charles' own organizations. But what these organizations do is they take money from wealthy individuals, either through donations or perhaps, through living wills or other means, and they donate to particular causes that those donors want. So what it does is it kind of acts like a way of laundering money in a way. So the donation, as it appears publicly, will come from donors' trust or donors' capital fund. But the only way they're able to give money, right, is if they have money, and that money is coming from other sources. So these two donor advised funds give substantial amounts. We're seeing more money coming through donors trust than donors capital fund as of late. We still haven't seen the latest filing for donors capital fund, which is 2018. That's the latest we can get at this time. But donors trust pumped again over $100 million into right-wing infrastructure in 2018. So these are two very, very influential vehicles for the Koch political network. The next one is a rather new one, or I should say the next two are rather new ones. So Charles recently has sort of rebranded his network and reorganized his network. And the new umbrella name of this network is Stand Together. And so one of the new, or two of the newer ones that we've seen pop up are Stand Together Chamber of Commerce and the Seminar Network Trust. Seminar Network is the old kind of name of the Koch donor network, which meets twice a year and brings together people. Previously, in order to be a member of that donor network, you would need to give at least a minimum of 100,000. I'm not sure what it is at this time because we haven't had any intelligence of what that minimum contribution is. But these are two other major, sources of funding for the network that Charles and David have set up. So most people are probably familiar with, I think, the political network, right? So I will turn to that next. The major political organization is Americans for Prosperity, which is their AstroTurf operation. They claim that they are operating in 38 states and that they have 3.2 million activists. Now, this seems to be an embellishment because, well, for one, for those of us who track them locally and in communities don't see many activists really on the ground. Now there is evidence that there are people, going into communities. There are certainly some offices, but those offices are often not manned by more than one person. They're oftentimes empty, and there's no public disclosure of the names of the activists, right? So we're really kind of taking their word here of the size of their network. Now that doesn't mean it's not influential. It certainly is. And we do see, these activists showing up in state houses. We see, of course, the sister organization, Americans for Prosperity Action, which is their political committee, sending out mailings, or you may have seen the ads on TV, right, for certain candidates, or you may have seen the ads on Facebook or Hulu or whatever, right? But the exact size is sort of hard to know or hard to understand, right? Americans for Prosperity recently, like the donor network, has rebranded and has taken under its arms a number of what we call front groups. Front groups are groups that appear to be led by a particular demographic or this is a bit hard to explain, but once I give examples are easier to understand. But they appear to be one thing. It's sort of hard to figure out who's behind them or who's organizing them. So one example of this is the Libra Initiative. The Libra Initiative Is that you, Sam, moving some stuff around?
No, I think some other folks are unmuted, so I'm working on that. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. That sounds like someone's moving furniture. Um, so the first one is Libra Initiative. So Libra Initiative used to be an independent nonprofit and now is under the Americans for Prosperity umbrella. It is the sort of Latino political group. And this group was set up to sort of engage Latinos and Latinas in their communities and they would hold events in AFP offices or Americans for Prosperity offices in order to get this particular demographic in. If you go to the website, it will seem like it's all run by this demographic, but in fact it is a Koch network, and they're getting folks to vote or trying to push people to vote for certain candidates, or get out the vote for certain candidates, or oppose or support certain ballot initiatives, not unlike Americans for Prosperity. A similar group or a similar type of front group that they have is called Concerned Veterans for America. This is as in the name, right? Is they're veterans. Now they have veterans on staff, right? But again, many of the issues are issues that align with the Koch, libertarian political ideology, just often with a sort of veterans focus. So, for example, they were trying to get the veterans choice. I'm blanking on the name for the medical plan, but trying to get veterans choice so that veterans wouldn't have to rely completely on the veterans medical program that's provided by the country, but could use privatized medicine as well, or private clinics. And so again, sort of through their ideology of wanting to privatize, wanting everything to be run by businesses, right, instead of the state. Another one is Generation Opportunity. This is a front group that's aimed at young people. This one has not really taken off as well for them, and you don't see as many active chapters as Libre or CVA, or Concerned Veterans for America. But it's still there. It's still technically under the Americans for Prosperity umbrella. And one way that they're able to get folks to kind of take positions into these groups and the political network is through their Grassroots Leadership Academy. This was something that we first broke at CMD, that these AFP offices were holding trainings across the country, and they have different levels, so you get different certificates, and then after, I forget how long it is at this point, but you go to then a national training, which is in 2 or 3 locations across the U.S., and then you're often able to get positions within the network. A very influential group, very just like the others, very well funded, right? And then you have Stand Together, which is as I talked about, was the sort of umbrella of the major donor network, but it also has this like kind of political component. It's trying to Charles has been very concerned with his public image overlaid over the last couple of years because of all the negative attention, and so he's tried to enact this major sort of PR overhaul to improve his image in the public. And Stand Together, gives grants to local groups and is involved in many of the so-called criminal justice initiatives that he, has been working on as of late, most often due to his close relationship with Mark Holden, a Koch lieutenant who was previously a prison guard, who has had some influence over Charles to change his mind over the years on some of his criminal justice policies. AFP itself could not be effective, without the data and operation known as I-360. I-360 is a massive data analytics company that Charles set up in order to get data points on Americans to help his activists, his political network, to identify receptive folks to approach and get involved, or to vote or for or against in certain ways. So they are the ones who provide the software that is put on AFP or any of these other activists that I've talked about, activist groups, phones or tablets, and they go around the neighborhoods. And so they're able to cover more distance and more areas using that. We suspect that they also use this data for targeted social advertising or, social advertising or social influencing. But it's really a gigantic outfit. And in looking at the money, Charles will often announce about how much money he's going to spend each election cycle. And in tracking it, we find a lot of money is missing, and we suspect quite a bit of that is going to their big data operation there. Now I'll turn to research. So Charles, has always been interested in academia. He's a libertarian and has studied libertarian thought, quite deeply, and he has taken an interest in funding education as a way of trying to, shift academia in his direction, or in a right direction, as we would like to say. Two areas that he's really focused on in order to build a sort of research network are the organization State Policy Network and university centers, and the funding of university centers and the academics, right? So those of you that are on the call that work at universities or are academics themselves, you may have come in contact to some of these, right? So the State Policy Network is a massive right-wing web of so-called think tanks and nonprofits and other groups in 50 states. And they have a total of revenue of about 120 million as of our last analysis. These think tanks are often called upon in the states to provide academic legitimacy for policy changes. So, if there's some sort of policy that's brought up, right, at the state level, they will be, they may come in, with their media outlet and promote that policy, or they may provide us a research study to kind of support that policy, or they may show up at a public hearing to support that policy. So just take one example, like right to work, which was something that made its way through the states years ago. Is one where we saw the State Policy Network have a very central role in getting things passed. A lot of the testimony came from local State Policy Network think tanks, but also national ones, and even ones in other states, right? All with funding from similar sources, including the Koch network. The university centers, are oftentimes partnering with the State Policy Network. Now, these may be legal centers, they may be economic centers, they may be policy centers or public policy centers. And oftentimes they're, staffed with academics that the Kochs, funded or provided scholarships for. Sam can get, more into this and provide you more information of what this looks like specifically in certain areas. But we in Wisconsin, over the past years came, to a fight with this in terms of, the minimum wage increase and, talk of Medicaid expansion. And, as soon as these things were brought up by our new Democratic governor who came in last year, the university centers that were Koch funded and the local State Policy Network think tanks came together with studies and presented news, in opposition of those policies. So they really come out and in full force. And if you're a legislator and you don't have the time, these can seem very influential. And indeed are influential, depending on the makeup of legislatures or state government. The Kochs are big supporters of the State Policy Network sister organization, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which I talked about before. The Center for Media and Democracy was the first to kind of expose this group It's a massive pay-to-play operation where legislators are brought together with corporate lobbyists and fancy resorts a couple times a year, and they together discuss policies, write up policies, and vote on model policies where the law is actually, or the bill is actually drafted behind closed doors without the public's insight, taken back to their state houses, and then there's usually a blank for the state or a blank for the name, and these bills are there therefore introduced, right? Some of the largest delegations, like in the states, of Alec legislators are, Texas, Ohio, Wisconsin has a large delegation, and places like Hawaii, for example, do not have as many, right? But these work together, right? So I was talking, previously about the research. So when these ALEC bills come to the state houses, there's already like research typically, if you're looking at the state level, that's been presented by the State Policy Network or university centers that are Koch supported, to sort of prime the public for the particular bill as it's introduced. So they work lock and step together to get policies passed, and those policies are, oftentimes anti-labor, anti-environment, for privatizing education. Just a few examples here. For the sake of time, I'll move on. So the Koch network, is for many years pushed for school privatization, and I'm talking about at the K-12 level. And they're very much opponents of public education, despite what they say. Should look at what they do. And two recent efforts that they have that they've announced are, one is called Yes Every Kid, and this is a group that will lobby and do political campaign work, either promoting or opposing ballot measures. And the second group that they recently launched is together with the Walton Family Foundation, another organization. The Waltons, of course, are the family that have made massive amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars through Walmarts, which are all over the globe, to aid the charter movement and other school privatization efforts. Now, although they have these, they're still using other outfits in their network to promote these same policies, whether it be State Policy Network think tanks or Americans for Prosperity, which will, lobby or, do, media campaigns for certain school privatization efforts, right? Finally, legal. So, the Kochs, as Sam mentioned early on, are very interested in our judicial system, our legal system. As things are challenged, it's, they have to have friends, right, in the courts. So two, particular things that I'll, focus on here are that the Kochs support are, one is the Republican Attorney Generals Association, or what we call RAGA. This is a national group that brings together all the Republican state attorney generals. They come, and in particular, we saw a lot of work when Obama was president, to challenge many of his environmental regulations, for example, in the states, and also do massive collective lawsuits to go, up to through the courts, finally to the Supreme Court, to hopefully overturn some of those policies that they dislike. Also, there's state litigation centers, which and these are often housed in State Policy Network think tanks to assist in legal challenges. Usually they give pro bono assistance to individuals or organizations that they politically align with or line up with ideologically. Most famous being in recent years, Mark Janus, who came to the Illinois Policy Institute for help in not paying his union dues. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in Mark Janus's favor, in his favor. All right, so now we'll turn to our websites. I know this is a lot of information, so just bear with me here. And how to use our websites to sort of find different information that could be useful for you. with this, yeah, our featured blog, which is exposed. And again, that's at exposedbycmd.org. This is where all of our original research is housed. We have a number of writers on staff and contracting with us to cover, you know, aspects of the Koch network, but also other types of white ring efforts that we're seeing in the States and at the national level. You know, so you can see our investigations here at the top. And we have a nice, you know, kind of search bar here at the top where you can kind of put stuff in, you know, say Charles Koch. And you'll be able to get, you know, the different hits here to see, right? Our research on, you know, say state candidates. So, you know, a lot of people or a lot of mainstream media outlets focus on political support at the national level. So we also want to look at and highlight that, you know, they're working in the states as well, who those state candidates are, right? Judicial candidates, or, you know, even city council or county candidates or school board candidates, for example. You know, so this is where you'll find, you know, all of our original research. We have another blog, PR Watch, which is an older blog. This is a blog that we are eventually going to sunset, but right now we are, you know, sort of copying the pieces that we post over to PR Watch. And this is a very long-standing blog, so it has a lot of you know, different pieces in particular from many years ago that have not been copied over to Exposed. Now, probably our biggest resource that we maintain and you know, post our research on is SourceWatch, which is a wiki, and that's located at sourcewatch.org. As you can see right here at the top, we have our Alec Exposed investigation, our Koch Exposed investigation, SPN Exposed. So you can kind of, you know, on your own time, go through and check out these, you know, different sites. Just for the sake of time, I'll click on one. So here's, you know, one of the new ones that I was talking about, the Stand Together Chamber of Commerce. So we'll have, like, usually an intro here at the top of, you know, how it started, what it was before, you know, so this is the new rebrand of what was called Freedom Partners before, or the Freedom Partners Chamber of Commerce, which was previously before that, the Association of American Innovation. So there's a historical element here to these sites. You know, we have, you know, ties to the Trump administration, but the things that in usually some news or election activity, which Freedom Partners was very interested in. We haven't seen any election activity for Stand Together Chamber of Commerce yet, but if so, that would be placed up there. We always have a grant section, you know, so who are they giving money to? So as you can see, in 2018, this you know, Stand Together Chamber was a huge source of Americans for Prosperity funding, right? 81 million. You know, so that was, I believe, AFP that year had total revenue of 91 or somewhere around there, which you can see if you just click on it. It'll take you to, you know, the next site. If you go down to, you know, core financials, yeah, so 96, right? So that's a huge amount of money that year, and then you can see what AFP also gave to, right? So there's always this kind of core, you know, financials, grants, sections to the sites. And also we track personnel. So if you scroll, you know, to the bottom here, you can see, and again, this is as of December 2018. The reason being, right, we don't have any newer IRS filings beyond that. So as soon as we get new IRS filings, we'll have those up. If the organization posts the personnel on the website, then we will be able to give more updated information. But many of the Koch sites do not do that. But here you can see, you know, who are currently executive management and then former management, right? So it gives you a, you know, oh, who else was there, right? And then where might they be now, right? So Mark Short, right, who used to be the president of Freedom Partners, is now working closely with Mike Pence, our vice president, for example. Um, so it's kind of a way to kind of track and see what their influence is. And then all the way, usually, I mean, although not for every site we have this, but we'll have the IRS filings embedded down at the bottom, so you can look at the originals there. Last but not least, we have our Alec Exposed site. I'm not going to go into depth here with this. The reason being is we're currently revamping it, and perhaps, as Sam mentioned, I'll come back and do another webinar. But I can, definitely do a webinar, and we will do one as well, the Center for Media and Democracy, on that new revamped site. But if you look here on the left side, a lot of this is what people will be interested in. The bills, what are the Alec bills, right? So we have a bunch of these bills, listed here. We have the largest library of Alec bills, both current and sunsetted, and those that they've tried to scrub and distance themselves from, such as Stand Together, or not Stand Together, sorry, Stand Your Own Ground law, right? Which, came to light with the Trayvon Martin tragedy, and, voter ID. We have Alec corporations. So if you're curious if a corporation has ties to Alec, you can come to this site here. I should say that our research and highlighting of the corporate sponsorship of Alec has led to 115 or over 115 corporations leaving Alec over the years, and we do keep track of that as well, because occasionally they try to come back to Alec. So if you're ever interested, you can take a look at this as well. So here's a page of those that cut ties. We have, where is it? A lot of people are interested in this tab here, which is Alec Politicians, right? So who are you suspect, someone might be a member of Alec. You can come to this page here and, search, go down, let's say like Wisconsin. You can look in, you can see who currently we have, documented. The numbers are the sources. So if you click on the number, then you can see, the source that shows where they had some type of tie. Sometimes it's a signing on a letter. Sometimes it's an actual payment, for membership. Sometimes it's listed, like Rapagel here as a state chair. So there's many reasons. And not only do we keep track of, who's current, but who used to be there. So as soon as they leave the legislature or they drop out, we don't let them off the hook. We make sure that we document that they're still there, just in case they work together in the future. Okay. So now let's move to talk a bit about research skills, right? So when I'm starting out, I often just begin with SourceWatch. So SourceWatch, because I'm, the research director here, and, I oversee interns and writers and whatnot, and I'm always trying to get, things that we think are important into SourceWatch. That's often where I will begin. If I'm beginning a story, if I'm looking into a particular bill, I will look into Alec. I will look into SourceWatch, for those individuals or corporations, in order to begin. But if I'm unable to find anything, then of course I will move to a search of our Exposed blog. And if still I can't find anything, then you get into kind of Google or Google Alerts. Now Google Alerts are often where I will find news stories. I think Google Alerts are incredibly informative and useful for tracking, people, organizations, and actually anything that you can just pick a keyword and it delivers to your mailbox either once a day or once it pops online, however you exactly want to do it. Beyond that, I often visit organization websites. So, I visit Alec's website just about every day. I visit SPN's website just about every day. I'm, using TweetDeck, right, to look at a number of different keywords and follow a number of different organizations, Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts. I don't look at with Instagram as much, but occasionally during meetings, like if I'm tracking an Alec meeting, I will look at Instagram as well and look for certain politicians that I know are there to gain insight into what's going on. Because, as I said, these meetings are often closed, so we're unable to get access. So social media can be very useful, along with the organizational websites, to get an idea of what's going on, or what certain organizations or individuals are working on at a particular time, or what their positions are. And events, of course, such as these webinars. So the Koch network does a lot of webinars. Just recently, I guess it was yesterday. So AFP Texas, the Texas chapter, did a webinar together with SPN's Texas Public Policy Foundation on the COVID-19 response and what they think is the best response for the state of Texas, right? So things like this can be incredibly informative as to understand, what their policy goals might be and what you might be, up against, in the legislature or in the public realm in the immediate future. If you're able to, it's great to go in person to events. You can really learn a lot. In particular, you can see who's there and just how many people are there, which I think is, when it's on camera, a lot of that can be controlled. And how can you find out about that? They often create Facebook events or Eventbrites, or they will, have a sign up for information on their particular website. So you can just sign up for the newsletter, which is often what I do, and find out about this stuff. Other useful research tools, lobbying records. Now, the federal lobbying records are open to all and digitized. You can find those online. And you can, at the state level, it depends where, which state you live in. But some states have better, ethics around lobbying records and posting these things. Wisconsin's particularly good. Other states are not. A site called Follow the Money also, has a good center for researching lobby records. So I would suggest using that as well. Tax filings, as I already talked about, are very useful, right? And you can obtain those directly from the IRS, or you can, wait for some of those filings to appear online in different places, such as GuideStar is a good one. Citizen Audit is another good one. There's the IRS website itself is starting to get some of these filings online. So these are, some of the places. SourceWatch, as I showed you, when we get these, we often put them online, and they're embedded through Document Cloud. So you could also go straight to Document Cloud and do a search there. Finally, open records requests. So again, this depends what level of government or where you live, but I think sorry about the notifications here. A second, just to turn this off. I turned it off. Yeah, so open records requests can be very useful. They take time, so it depends how much time you have, right? But if you have time, you can, do open records requests with the federal government. Right now, the waiting is very long. In some cases, years with like the EPA. So it depends again, how much time you have. But you can do these either online or you can send them, through the mail. In terms of state, you have to kind of check your state to see what's available, but you can get things like email communications with certain keywords. You can get, testimonies. You can get notes. You can get, even information such as text messages or things on apps. And again, it depends on your own state laws. So you have to see, what's, what the law says, but can be really interesting to see. And this also goes for, I should add, public universities. So if you have a public university and you have a strong open records law in your state, you can do public records requests, searching for communications with Koch network vehicles, right? Or Koch academics with the Koch network, or what kinds of grant agreements they have, etc. So it looks like we're at the 155 points. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there and see if there's any questions.
I have a question. When you're doing an open records request, how specific do you have, like if you're doing it for a university and you want to know like the ties to Koch networks, how specific do you have to be? Like, do you have to name all of those front groups, or?
Who am I speaking with?
This is Elizabeth, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Hi, Elizabeth. So it depends on, I mean, the more specific you can be, the better, right? So if you have an idea of a particular individual or a specific group, then I would try to be as specific as possible, because most of my records requests that get denied are for being overbroad. But part of that reason is because I'm trying to find out exactly who they're in contact with, So what you can do is if you're not sure, is, like I said, try to get access to, grant lists for a particular year. So, what are the funding agreements between a certain center and a certain individual, right, for a particular year or for a particular 6 months or something like that.
Hey, this is Sam with UnKoch. And to go off of that, I want to give one caveat around public records requests at public universities. Ideally, if you have strong sunshine laws or records request laws, you can get access to documents at public universities. But unfortunately, even in states where there are some decent public records laws, if a public university has a private fundraising foundation, sometimes those foundations are not covered by public records laws. And so I just wanted to provide that caveat, but also emphasize that even if that is the case in your state, a non-answer is also an answer in terms of something to organize around. You can organize around that lack of transparency, which is a tactic that many of our campuses have used. And Elizabeth and anyone else on the call, I would also be happy to share y'all on public records request examples or ones that we've submitted to colleges and universities across the country. If you want to model a request off of any of those, I can also offer UnKoch staff and kind of offer David's capacity. If you're running into a major issue of getting access to information, we can also help you refine your records requests. I mean, I would add that, what Sam said is, totally true. That, a refusal is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Or a roadblock. We engage, at CMD in a lot of open records or transparency litigation. And, folks don't want to be, on the other side of this. They do not want to be, against transparency or against open government. So it puts them in a bad position. And, people oftentimes don't forget, including, voters. So it's worth it. And if it becomes a big battle, it often is a battle that, people will rally together with, right? Or rally around together. Absolutely. And speaking of using your research skills to rally people, I want to quickly pivot back and present a few slides on using what David just discussed to organize, and then we will pause again and accept some additional questions. Just to summarize, thank you, David, for everything that you just helped us understand and the resources that you just identified for us. To go back to the introduction David gave, I just want to reiterate that so much of that donor network and that political infrastructure that David discussed that is so critical to Charles Koch and the Koch donor network's success politically is largely rooted in the spread of ideas and the mainstreaming of ideas. And that's why UnKoch's bread and butter is working in higher education and in K through 12 education, and partnering with organizations in those spaces, because we're really seeing the education front as a front to really disrupt the Koch network's agenda. And so that is the work that UnKoch does in terms of organizing a lot around the research that David and CMD exposes. So for example, David took us to the PR Watch website earlier. Earlier today, I just looked at the PR Watch website and found these 3 headlines of stories that CMD's published recently, all of which have to do with the coronavirus. And so these are timely stories about the Koch network's involvement in a timely issue. And these are stories that, whether you are working on a campus campaign or a community campaign, or you're involved with a state-based advocacy group, the stories that CMD publishes, you can then take those stories and use them for yourself, whether that is to politically, educate your grassroots base by sharing their content on your social media, or taking these stories and organizing with it through developing digital or grassroots campaigns, or writing an op-ed using the data that CMD has gathered for us. So for example, this top article talks about how Americans for Prosperity has fought to get the Trump administration to allow states to impose work requirements for Medicaid. These work requirements essentially let states take away people's Medicaid coverage if they aren't working or engaged in work-related activities for like a specified amount of time, hours per month. And some of these, several states around the country have passed these work requirements, but that's obviously a huge hindrance right now under the coronavirus crisis that we're experiencing. People literally cannot get jobs. Many people are being laid off and unable to work. And so this is a very easy example of how you can take something that CMD has largely done the background research for us already. See if your state has a Medicaid work requirement, and if so, write a scathing op-ed calling out the state for selling out to the Koch network and implementing these policies that are ultimately serving the Koch network's privatization agenda and harming people who are just trying to feed their families during a global health crisis. For the sake of time, there are several other examples, but I just wanted to use this moment to really highlight that a lot of the stories that CMD publishes, the data in those can then be taken out of those stories and leveraged locally. I don't know about David, but I would love to see, future articles that CMD publishes, whether that's in a state or a national issue, and see, local op-eds or state-based op-eds popping up all around the country talking about the same content, but in a localized narrative. Largely, that is what the Koch network's success has been built upon, is taking one policy or one concept and getting their network to leverage it and build a conversation locally. But we have the power to do that as well. And a lot of what CMD publishes give us tools to do that type of narrative agitation locally. Similarly, you can use SourceWatch for several different exciting organizing tools. So for example, a year ago or so, I was doing research on Utah State University and a new Koch-funded center that they just created. And I wanted to understand how connected this center is to the Koch network. And the students and faculty I was working with really wanted that leverage, that information to build out their campaign. And so if you just go on the website of a Koch-funded center and look at their board of directors, for example, let's see, who's Kimberly Dennis is she a part of the Koch network? You might find some of these different organizations she's also affiliated with. Go copy and paste them, plug them into SourceWatch, and there you have it. She is indeed affiliated with other aspects of the Koch network. And to save some time, if you were to plug in basically anything, David also already talked about Donors Trust. If you were to plug in the Property and Environmental Research Center, you would see that that's also a part of the Koch network in terms of being a local think tank. And so SourceWatch can be a really incredible tool for power mapping your opposition, whether it is power mapping a state legislature and who's involved in Alec, or power mapping the board members of a new Koch center that's coming to campus. Another way you can use it for organizing is action opportunities. So I was contacted by students at the University of Pittsburgh a while back, and they mentioned that their Koch-funded center had just recently released a list of upcoming events. And going back to what David was mentioning earlier about events can be a really critical space to not only do opposition research, it can also be a really awesome space to do an action. And so the Pittsburgh students sent me this list, and from doing this, a lot of people's names just naturally pop out to me nowadays. But if it didn't, people who are trying to figure out, okay, which of these speakers might be the most connected to the Koch network, which of these speakers might be the most relevant target if we wanted to disrupt an event that the Koch network was having on our campus. And let's just choose Jordan Lofthouse. I was actually familiar with Jordan's name from doing research on the university, or Utah State University. If they're a professor, you can look at their CV, which is essentially a fancy way of saying a professor's resume. And then you can also use this and paired with SourceWatch to, again, power map and better understand if this person is indeed a major player in the Koch network. So for example, when you scroll down to the employment of this individual, Mercatus Center, that seems interesting. I wonder if that's part of the Koch network. Yep, SourceWatch tells me it absolutely is. Similarly, I wonder if Strata Policy is a part of the Koch network. Let's check it out. So Strata Policy doesn't have a page, but it seems that that phrase pops up on Koch and Utah State University. And so then we can read a little bit about what Strata Policy's connection is to the Koch network and Utah State. To go back to the Mercatus Center real quick, you see that they're part of George Mason University. And so that takes me back to my third point about using SourceWatch, is this using SourceWatch for your organizing can also result in really awesome and critical network building opportunities. So for example, when the students at Pittsburgh mentioned that they had that list, I looked at the list and found Jordan Lofthouse, his name. I could then connect the students in Pennsylvania with faculty and students in Utah who are really familiar with this guy, and they can build out an action and they can help inform the students who are wanting to take action about personal experiences with this individual. And so that's a lot of the reason UnKoch exists, is to help build those networks and that access to one another. But those are just really simple examples of how you can leverage the resources that David just presented to us to identify critical organizing opportunities. Similarly, you can use Alec Exposed in that way. So David demonstrated the Alec Exposed website. I use the Alec Exposed toolbar probably daily, which is what I have a screenshot of over here. Alec Exposed, if you look through and inform yourself more on Alec and the ways in which the Koch network uses Alec to essentially attack every public good that many of us need and support having in existence, it really provides critical information that helps with relationship building If you've ever been a part of a organizing training with me, you know that I emphasize the need to build one-on-one relationships and to really get to know people that you're bringing into a movement. So let's say you're having a one-on-one with a peer or a future colleague, and you're trying to figure out like what gets them up in the morning, why do they like to organize, and perhaps you realize that they have a dream of becoming a public education, a public school teacher, or they don't have health insurance and that's really bumming them out and harming their ability to live their lives as they see fit. And so you can learn about things that are really personal to people and then really use these resources that CMD has created to equip yourself with being able to connect what matters to people to the Koch network and how the Koch network is attacking those things that matter to people. And so I really love these one-pagers over here on the Alec Exposed website in terms of informing myself and informing the community members and student activists that I work with on how to better build relationship and identify coalition opportunities through these overlaps. Similarly, these resources talk about specific policies that have harmed these areas, whether that's, public education, healthcare, the environment, and that can be really useful for your messaging because once you have an understanding of who's being harmed, you can then really emphasize who's doing the harming, and that is the Koch network. And then particularly if you're at a college or university and trying to organize against these research centers, or if you're in a K through 12 course or, you're a K through 12 teacher and you're seeing Koch funded curriculum show up in your K-12 curriculum, you can really ask those hard questions of, is it ethical and appropriate for my public institution, my public school, to be providing a platform to help the Koch network execute that harm? Because as David mentioned, so much of what the Koch network is able to achieve through the American Legislative Exchange Council and achieve at the policy level is very much reliant on the mainstreaming of these ideas. And then really quickly, I want to give a shout out to DSMOG. They have really great resources as well, particularly a Koch network database. And DSMOG has also mentioned that they would love to do a webinar for us to inform folks on how to best use their resources. And then, of course, it would be inappropriate if I didn't shout out UnKoch. UnKoch has really great resources under reports and resources. Reports have more of the information or informative research content, and resources we have a toolkit that includes a multi-page section on research strategy and tactics, as well as other databases that are useful to organizing. And so I really hope before we wrap up and move on to questions that this webinar was useful in not only helping you identify these resources that exist, because CMD certainly has an incredible amount of resources that are absolutely useful to all types of grassroots campaigns, but also to kind of get your wheels spinning around ways in which you can leverage resources that CMD is creating for you, for us, and turn them into local grassroots campaigns. I'm sure David would love to see so many of the stories that CMD publishes drive local agitation and political education.
Yeah, I'll just add, of course, we love, for people to take our information or our research and run, but also those of you that are in local communities, if you have questions or you have, tips, feel free to reach out to us. Again, my email is david@prwatch.org.
Awesome. All right, I will go ahead and pause and we'll review some Q&A. So the first question that we had was, David, is there an equivalent network to the Koch network, but on the left?
I mean, the right likes to point out, George Soros and his funding of what would be perceived as left center organizations. But I don't think it is as sophisticated as what the Kochs have set up, nor does it have as much money in it, right? And ironically, right, Charles and George just together set up a foreign policy center together, to try to reduce America's involvement in foreign policy or foreign interventions overseas. But yeah, there isn't exactly. There's an equivalent to Alec, right, which is SIX, the State Innovation Exchange. This is a group that it's more a little more transparent than Alec, right? They're not getting in, or huddling in 5 4-star resorts and writing legislation with corporate lobbyists. But certainly it does, similar to Alec, it promotes model legislation. And, I would say, that model legislation, it serves some interest, right? I've always taken the position personally that, legislators should be listening to their constituents, and their constituents should be driving policy, not any type of special interest group, whether it's a perceived left or right or center or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of my simple answer there.
Thank you. Another question was, what is the Koch network's link to the Mount Pelerin Society?
I wouldn't be able to answer that quickly. So if you want, whoever answered that or asked that question, feel free to email me and I'll get back to you.
Cool. I can connect y'all for a more in-depth conversation. And then for those who asked that question, if you go on our website and look at our white supremacy report, we have some data on the Koch network's connection to the Mount Pelerin Society and overlaps with white supremacy. What was so you mentioned Yes Every Kid, I think was the organization that Walton's fund at K through 12. I think you mentioned 2. What was the second group that you mentioned, David?
4.0 schools.
There you go.
Yeah, it's a new one. So we don't have too much information on them just yet. But we did see the release. We do see that they have, or they began with 10 million. Because it's so recent too, we don't have any information on where the grants are going or whatnot, but we will likely next year.
Cool. What power grabs have you seen since the onset, or power grabs from the Koch network or players within the ultra wealthy have you seen since the onset of the coronavirus crisis?
That's a good question. I mean, the most obvious examples I would say are, the Republican attorney generals in Texas and Ohio closing the abortion clinic providers as non-essential, right, business or operations or whatever. So taking an opportunity to leverage their power in a crisis to, close something that they personally disagree with, but that are legal. Otherwise, I mean, we've seen stuff with elections, right? Moving elections, advocating for paper ballots over polling places. Some of this stuff can be seen as, efforts of voter suppression, but could also be seen as a means for protecting communities. So, but certainly this is something that I've been particularly interested in looking at.
I'll add, and thanks Jasmine for plugging this in the chat, that there is some new information about demonstrating how Charles Koch invested a lot of money in encouraging the government to cut CDC's budget. And now the Koch network is attacking the shelter-in-place policies that claiming, that they're harmful for business. And so there's definitely effort by the Koch network to leverage this moment in favor of their ideology and narrative framing. And I'll just kind of plug, definitely look out for something coming from UnKoch and our national team about that. We're likely going to have a digital action, because we can't organize in person, around that.
Yeah,
So
I
more
mean,
to come.
yeah, and like, I mean, there's lots of previous actions of the Kochs that are disastrous right now, right? I mean, the advocating for work requirements, in order to receive unemployment, right? Or their huge movement to oppose Medicaid expansion. So there's a lot of things we can look back on, right? Where we can see, or their criminal justice policies, the mandatory minimums, back in the day, all of these have, which packed the jails, and now we have all these folks getting sick. So there's many things we can look at, but as of like right now, things that they're doing, right? I haven't seen too much in terms of them trying to exert more power than they usually do, but they certainly have a lot of operatives high up in the Trump administration. And as I mentioned before, with Mark Short, the previous president of Freedom Partners, being right by Mike Pence's side most of the time, and Mike Pence is in charge of responding to this crisis. So and there's way more former Koch-tied academics and administrators and economists, et cetera, in the administration. And, finally, what you've seen with the EPA suspending all enforcement of, those who break regulations. I think this is definitely, a major Koch wish list item. And, we should all be paying attention in our communities to see if, evidence of dumping or pollution or more pollution as the EPA, turns its head.
Absolutely. And then the last question that we had in our chat was, are there any Koch-funded activity at college campuses related to the coronavirus, such as how to use the crisis to advance causes like online education or privatization of medical research?
I think that the academics have been talking about this. So I was in academia before, and a lot of my friends who are professors at universities, there's been a sort of movement to not teach classes very well online out of fear that the right, is going to push for, more sort of online classes and online education if they see that it's been done successfully. So I think people are aware of this for sure, on both sides. But I don't think, there's been any conclusion as of yet, in particular, because a lot of students are just getting back to campus or back to their online campus.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to speak to this question, I think a lot of that lies in, similar to your answer earlier, David, in like the concepts, ideas, and narratives that the Koch network has been pushing for so long. Like now they're really coming to the forefront, pushing people into even more relevant crisis in this moment because of the coronavirus. And so I don't know, I don't have any like direct research on how the Koch network is playing into funding stuff right now as a response to the coronavirus, but I definitely think I know what is happening is that there are major fears around what the right has been pushing for in terms of privatization coming true because of everyone suddenly shifting to online education. So I'll just reiterate, what you were saying, David. All right, those were all of the group questions. You can now unmute yourselves if anyone wants to ask a verbal question like Elizabeth did earlier. I'll unmute everyone. If anyone has any questions, you're now unmuted. All right. If there are no questions, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This is an awesome conversation. I really appreciated how engaged everyone was in the conversation in the chat. I will be following up with that feedback form. So please, if you can, provide feedback. You'll get an email in your inbox from me shortly. And then we will also be in touch by the end of this week with all of the resources, links, and supplemental materials that either David or myself promised throughout this conversation. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Sam. Stay healthy, everyone.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, David.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you all so
Thank you all.
much.
Thanks, Sam.
Hey.